Hi everyone, welcome back to The Mystic in the Woods. I'm Kate, and I am so excited to share with you this conversation that I had with Alexandra from Sacred Soleil. She is I'm going to look at her list here, a professional astrologer, a certified trauma-informed feminine embodiment and pleasure coach, and she is the owner of Sacred Soleil. So she is where I buy all of the oils and the herb bundles that I'm always talking about on the channel. I had a full natal chart reading with her, and it was absolutely phenomenal. In my last video, I talked about how I've been going through of death, void, rebirth, and her reading really gave me a lot of information or clarity or confirmation about just where I'm going. And it was such a fantastic reading. So I am so excited to share this conversation with you. We talk about how she started Sacred Soleil, astrology. We talk a lot about Black Moon Lilith, and we talk about it. We get into shadow work and sacred feminine embodiment, and we do talk a little bit. A sexual assault is mentioned, so I'll just put a little trigger warning on here. There's no details included or anything like that, but we really get into it. And we have a really juicy conversation. So I'm so excited to share this with you. And I hope that you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed having her on the channel. All right, I'm super excited to have you on the channel today. I'm always talking about, whenever I do favorite product reviews and stuff, I'm always talking about the oils, which now are gross and that's oily. I did that. They come perfect. They come in perfect condition. I always tell people that when I show this on the channel too.
Aw,
I buy all of my smoke bundles. I've got my mugwort sitting here, my cedar sitting here. Pretty much, you are the shop that I buy from, and you are now the only astrologer that I recommend or will go to as well. So I'm
thank
just so excited to
you.
have you actually here being I don't know, talk about all this stuff because you've got so much cool stuff going on.
Thank
So
you. I'm so happy to be here and connect.
yes, I had a reading with Alexandra was a few weeks ago now. Time is moving so weird.
Yeah.
Um, but it was so great. And the PDF, I told her this already, but the PDF that you sent ahead of time, I have a lot of heavy Scorpio placements. And so I'm just reading through this PDF. She sends you this amazing PDF. And every other paragraph is talking about how intensely I feel emotions. And I'm just I don't know if I should laugh or cry. I'm married to a man who doesn't believe in any of this stuff. And he can't even deny that this is the recipe of what it means to be Kate.
Yes.
So anyway, so I just want to know how you got into astrology and how you opened your shop. Let's start there because and how you do astrology, because don't you do it a little differently than I don't know a lot about
Yeah.
astrology.
Um, yeah, I do have kind of a rare technique to it. Mostly what I'm reading aspects and rulerships. So that is what's a little bit more unique about my reading style. And then also intuition is very much a part of that. But how I got into astrology, you know what? Ever since I can remember, since being a little girl, I was just amazed and I had this love for the stars, the planets, just outer space in general. And you could ask my mom, she will tell you that all she wanted to do was be an astronaut when she grew up. And it's true. So I actually was just very interested in astronomy. And at one point, I actually got bullied for it during, I think it was during fifth grade because was it fifth grade or fourth? I don't know, one of the two. And so I would actually, every time our class had library time, we would go visit and check out books. I always went to the science section and I always checked out these larger astronomy textbooks. And I was only in fourth or fifth grade. And at one point, these three boys in my class were like, "You're so weird. I can't believe you're reading these books, like you and your space books." And they grabbed my books and threw them at me. And it was so mean, but I was just so in love with the cosmos and everything that's beyond. Um, and just fascinated by it. I was fascinated by everything. Um, and so I always had this affinity for it. And then, obviously your dreams kind of shut down and you kind of stop, you know, digging into your hobbies and what actually calls you, because you're meant to focus more on the academics, in terms of English, mathematics, all that stuff. Anyway, so my life got pretty boring after me just solely focusing on just school in general and then extracurricular activities, that kind of stuff. And but it wasn't until I think it was high school that I kind of picked up a couple astrology books, and I was just like skimming through them. I was like, oh, I'm curious about it. I do really like how the astronomy plays into it. And you can't, the only reason why we have astronomy today is because we had astrology back then. That was kind of like the stepping stone for astronomy. And so I was always interested in it, but it wasn't until 2020, I believe, that I took it seriously, and I started, taking my courses and just like doing more and more work around astrology. So that's when I started studying it, and that's when I started taking it seriously. And I think it was around the COVID shutdown that commenced, I think March 16th of 2020. There
Mm-hmm.
was a few transits going on, and I was like, there's just no way. There's just no way that astrology is not real. Let's be fucking for real right now. And so, after 2020, I didn't look back, and that's here I am, 4 years later.
So is that when you started your online store and everything, or did they come
No,
into existence separately?
they came into it. Yeah. So both projects actually, they were very distant still because I think that's when my spiritual journey began with more traction. Um, I kind of I've always been spiritual, but I don't think I took it as serious. And then a lot of things started coming online for me around that time. And so I think I was just so immersed in that. And that's kind of when I started doing shadow work. That I was still studying astrology, but I didn't think that anything would really come to it. I kind of just wanted to understand my own chart and how it impacts the world in general. Um, so the store actually didn't come to existence until 2020, well, the concept was 2022. And that's when I started Sacred Soleil. And it was November 3rd of 2022. So
Okay.
that was born, the LLC was born. I kind of knew that I wanted a metaphysical shop, but I didn't know exactly, I was just, I guess, brainstorming around that time. But Sacred Soleil came to life. I followed the LLC. I have a birth chakra, huge Scorpio stellium, just like you. But
Yay for Scorpio.
yeah,
So
a lot of
intense.
Scorpio energy, very intense, very yeah. So and then I believe I launched like the first oils and the first batches of hand dipped incense in I think it was like spring 2023, or no, 2024. Nope, 2023.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been buying stuff from you.
Yeah.
I remember when you put the oils up for pre-order. So I talk
Yes.
about this on my channel all the time. Like, I'm not a huge fan of incense just because, like, honestly, a lot of it smells the same to me once it burns. And I'm
Yeah.
very sensitive to smoke. So I don't like to have like a lot of smoke going around.
Mhm.
Um, and I wanted to buy, I think I was looking for cedar specifically at the time, from a shop that doesn't have white sage, unless that person is from those
Yeah.
lineages. And then I also saw your oils and I was like, well, I'm going to try the oils out. And you put a sample of your, like, it's out of reach, unfortunately, one of your incenses in there. And I was like, oh my God, this is like the best thing I've ever smelled in my life. Like, I just store them open so I can just smell them. And then I burn them on my altar as like an offering and stuff. And
Yeah.
like, I swear to God that I have smelled this in a past life. Like, I have been in a temple that was burning this blend in a past life. Like, it feels, it can, I don't know. Anyway, it is so
Yeah, I remember
powerful.
you mentioning that
Yeah.
actually.
Because I was like, I need to know what's in this. And I like wanted to make sure I wasn't trying to like steal your recipe. I'm like, I just need to know what I'm smelling.
No,
Cause like,
I had a because I remember you texted me that, and I was like, oh, she's yeah. I
So
didn't
I
think you were
just
trying to steal my recipe, but yeah, I get it.
and I use all three. So I have your domination oil, your one that's a road opener, right? And then the
Yes.
divine protection one. And so
Hmm.
like I've had Kristen Ramazan on the channel. We talk about shadow work all the time here.
Hmm.
With Kristen, we talked about, clearing parasitic entities in the underworld and all the things. And so I've just really found like those oils like give my shadow work this amazing boost, as well as like protection when I'm clearing stuff or working with clients. Like it's just I'm really impressed. And I'm also very particular about, because I've had some experiences with products being probably unintentionally like laced with bad stuff, like either bad energy or occasionally like
Mm.
an actual entity or like just so so I'm very particular. Um but I love them so much.
Aw, I'm so happy that you
But
do. I'm
I
actually
really
very
do.
I am very particular about the whole making of them actually, because I do clear myself first.
Hmm.
I cleanse everything. Like it's a whole routine. It's a whole
Hmm.
ritual. Uh, so I am very, very particular about that. I wanted to
Yeah, I
serve
can tell.
as, good as possible. So yeah, I'm very particular about that. And I'm glad that if anybody would catch on to that, I think it would be you.
I'm quite particular. And um yeah, so because I do remember that they were like pre-orders or something.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
when I
So
first
that
put
was
that in.
early spring 2023
Yeah, and
when I
because I
put
think
that
that's when
out.
I finally started using any smoke again. Because of course because I got a almost 3-year-old, so he
Mhm.
was born in 2021, and of course like when you're
Mhm.
pregnant and then when he's an infant, and we live in a very small space right now, so I didn't want like a lot of smoke around my infant.
Yeah.
Um, which is why I was specifically looking for oils, but then you put that incense in there, and I was like, well, I have to have this. So so anyway, but I do think that what one of the reasons that you can correct me, but what I feel like one of the reasons that your products are like so clear and clean is probably because you are a proponent of shadow work in some
Yeah.
capacity.
Hmm.
Because that's how when we aren't doing our shadow work, that's how we unintentionally
Yes.
make missteps, I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm curious about like, okay, so I'm really curious about Black Moon Lilith, and everybody's going to see why I just wove these two things together in a second, because you talk
Yes,
about Black Moon Lilith a lot in
I
your
do.
content, and you've got this great free ebook. So I'll make sure the link is in the box below. But it's like a shadow worky type of a placement, right? So like,
Yeah.
tell me about Black Moon Lilith because I just think this is fascinating.
Okay. So yes, Black Moon Lilith is actually it is not a physical point. For example, obviously the planets are a physical point on the chart, but Black Moon Lilith is basically the lunar apogee, which is the furthest point in the moon's orbit from the Earth. Um, that's what's Black Moon Lilith. It is a hypothetical point, and that is representative of the dark feminine aspects that have been kind of shunned out, exiled due to societal shaming and good girl conditioning. So
Mhm.
that is basically Black Moon Lilith represents kind of what terrifies the patriarchy in your own psyche. So, that being said, and it's also about authenticity, right?
Mhm.
Because it's not, when you exile parts of yourself for the sake of um, washing yourself down, um, or really diluting yourself down, it's you're not being in your most authentic expression. And so Black Moon Lilith is a placement that we have to look at, kind of see how that's what's going on in the psyche there, what's being cast out, what have you been shamed for, What do you hold guilt around, and how can we bring that back and tell the nervous system it is safe? It is safe for you to stand in your truth. It is safe
Mhm.
for you to express with authenticity, and we need these parts of you. Um, so it is very much something that you want to reclaim for sure. So
It's
that's
like,
Black Moon Lilith.
so like it's in Scorpio for me, right? Because everything's in
Mhm.
Scorpio for me.
Everything in the first house too.
So like,
In the first house.
so with Black Moon Lilith and Scorpio, like give us an example. Like what does that look like then? Or can it look like?
Yeah. So Black Moon Lilith and Scorpio will often look like you have been conditioned to repress parts of your sexual expression. Obviously, we're talking about Scorpio, we're talking about Mars and Pluto because of the rulers. We're talking about Mars and Plutonian energy. So it can be very intense. Perhaps you have been told before that your emotions just are too intense. You're too much. There's too much around this. Kate, stop. It's too intense for me. You make people uncomfortable just by being your authentic self. And then obviously part of that would also be your sexual expression. Perhaps it's something that needs to come up and be integrated in a safe environment. So those are like the general themes. Obviously, that's just the placement. In order to get a proper interpretation, then we would have to look at the individual aspects, what it's aspecting, where's the ruler on the chart, that kind of thing. But in general, that's kind
Mhm.
of what Black Moon Lilith and Scorpio looks like.
I just feel like I just feel like this is really important for women. So like a huge part of my
Yes,
work
absolutely.
has become, shadow work, yes,
Mm-hmm.
always. Um, but also I'm stepping more and more into priestessing and really helping women to connect with the divine in an authentic way. And that is starting to look like very specifically, where are you afraid of
Yes.
your feminine energy? And oftentimes, like if you'd asked me like where are you afraid of your femininity 3 years ago, I'd be like, I don't even know what that question means,
Mm-hmm.
let alone like how to answer it. Um, but then as I started doing all my shadow work, I'm like, well, I'm actually like terrified of being judged for being too emotional, or because
Yes.
intuition is not as good as logic, or kind of pretty much everything that the patriarchy has deemed less has become synonymous with feminine. So if it's a
Yes.
feminine quality, it's deemed as less by the patriarchy. And I'm going to make really clear here, and we won't do the disclaimer again. The patriarchy for us is not the same as men. I'm
Correct.
not like, I know some of the best men,
Yes.
and men are also harmed by the patriarchy. The patriarchy is
Yep.
a system. It is not men specifically. I
Mm-hmm.
would like, before we get a bunch of comments about hating men, that
Oh,
is
yeah.
not what's happening.
That's an important
Um,
disclaimer.
but I'm raising a son.
Yeah.
Um, but it just feels like, I've been going through this huge voids process this summer.
Yeah.
And understanding this particular point in my chart really helped me to see why I was in that void and like what aspects of my femininity I'm hiding from. And when I say feminine, it's not always the like classic accepted version of femininity where we're wearing like a
Correct.
flowy white dress and we're like making bread with a baby. And if that's you, like do that. I think that's a beautiful version of femininity. It's just not the only version. It's
Mhm.
also, the feminine can be dark and can be full of, healthy rage and sex and the void and the darkness. Like that's all very feminine. They're
Yeah.
very feminine qualities. So I
Mhm.
just feel like this particular point was like so eye-opening for me. Like, okay, I'm not crazy. Like this is actually a piece of me that like needs to be brought up to the surface and healed, like specifically, kind of like,
Yeah, and
if
it
that
does
makes
get
sense.
very, very specific. And again, we're like coming up with this. I remember we mentioned I think we were talking about it in your actual reading, how there is it's a form of witch wounding as well. Black Moon
Hmm.
Lilith will tell you kind of where the witch wound is, um, particularly intense for you. But there was also, I think there might have been an aspect to Chiron, which was also kind of the wound behind, am I crazy? It's
Hmm.
like this trigger of like, am I sane? And it's like a constant gaslighting your own intuition and your innate wisdom.
Hmm.
That also goes hand in hand with Black Moon Lilith being in a water sign, and particularly in Scorpio, because Scorpio is the occult. It's what's beyond the veil,
Hmm.
and it's what's secretive. It's knowledge that isn't, easily accessible. And so when you have that access, to this knowledge, and it's not common, you get people who are like, well, you're crazy. Like, what do you mean? How would you know? So that's very, very common. But that's just like one of the manifestations of Black Moon Lilith. And of course, like depending on what archetype it's in, like, whether it's an Aries, Taurus, et cetera, it's going to manifest. It's like feminine repression, but it manifests according to the archetype that it's sitting in.
Hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. One of the things I probably should have mentioned this before we even like jumped on here. One of the things I'm going to ask you to do, you don't have to answer now,
Okay.
is do for my Reclaiming Eve students like a mini reading for them, like to get into
Mm-hmm.
that Black Moon Lilith aspect as they step into that program, because it's a 3 month deep dive very specifically on like reclaiming the feminine
Reclaiming.
aspects of
Mm-hmm.
the seven deadly sins and the Garden of Eden story and the
Yes.
whole thing.
And it's so
Um,
powerful. It goes hand in hand. You're right.
yeah, it's just, and of course, and like I read through it, and I'm like, but doesn't everybody have this? And it's like, well,
Yes,
no, like yes, but no, it looks different for everybody,
it
you
does.
know.
Well, that's where
So,
the aspects kick in.
hmm,
And that's why too,
yeah,
I'm very particular about the way that I read, because I
hmm,
don't just, I don't just look at a placement. I need to look at the rulership. I need to look at what it's aspecting, and then
hmm,
where's the ruler of that rulership. So it's like I daisy chain off of it, because it is very, very particular. For example, if it's aspecting Chiron, because I think yours might have been, then yes,
it sounds right.
you're gonna get that, am I crazy? And there's this constant gaslighting of your intuition,
Hmm.
because perhaps, and this is again, like I like to also separate my own beliefs from actual astrology, and
Hmm.
techniques. Um, but I think more often than not, Chiron and Black Moon Lilith specifically will tell you, which wounding that has happened as a result from previous lifetimes.
Hmm.
And so perhaps, you were someone in a previous lifetime who was regarded as insane, and, perhaps, you needed a lobotomy or something. So that's just kind of, it's very, yes, there are a lot of people who have, obviously you'll always have the placement in one of the 12 signs, but what decan is it in? Because that's its own flavor. And then what planets are they at? What planets is that point aspecting?
Hmm.
Is it forming a pattern, a chart pattern? Um, Rulership, everything. It's very, very specific.
Yeah,
So
and
it
the
doesn't suffice to, be like, oh, let me Google Black Moon Lilith and Aries. It doesn't suffice. It really doesn't.
mhm. No, that's what I loved about the write-up that you sent, is it was very um like they were summarized. Like it wasn't like I had to read like 5 pages on Black Moon Lilith. But
No.
there was like this aspect equals this aspect equals it. Like it was broken down in a way
Hmm.
that was like really easy to understand and really helped to pull everything together. Um, yeah, like I said, I'm gonna have you pull some other people that I have in my life, their charts. I'd be
Okay.
curious to see like my kids' chart and
Mm.
um some things like that. But so does it have like a tie to Lilith? Like why is it called that?
It's called Lilith because it's basically the dark side of the moon. And so where the moon in general in astrology is the mother moon arc or the mother moon archetype, the mother, it's like who the moon represents what emotionally nourishes you. And so it's Cancerian, right? It's the mother archetype. Well, Black Moon Lilith, the dark side of the moon, represents the aspects that have been exiled out of the feminine. It's like the feminine shadow. It's like the ugly parts of the feminine expression as society, deems.
Hmm.
So it does relate to the archetype of Lilith. It does have that tie because it's represented as the dark side of the moon astronomically.
Hmm.
And it's kind of the antithesis of the archetype of the mother who we love, that's like the light feminine, the loving. It's the loving mother, it's the nurture, it sustains life. And then we cast the dark feminine away because it's scary sometimes.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's scary.
Yeah. And I always talk about, like there's a dark doesn't equal bad, right? So we have dark and
Correct.
light on like a spectrum, and they can
Hmm.
both be equally divine or equally wounded. So, my work a lot of times is in talking about Eve and Lilith together,
Yeah.
and their stories together, and how we as a culture within the spiritual community have almost like unconsciously pitted them against each other. That
Yes.
Eve is somehow less and Lilith is somehow better because we're trying to reclaim the dark feminine. And so,
Yeah, I really dislike that saying that I see it all the time, and it
mhm,
more now than ever. I feel like I don't know why, but there's this saying that's like super popular on social media. I see it all the time in posts, and it's like be a Lilith, never an Eve, or something like that. And it's like
yeah.
that's not how that works. Um, and actually, in Judaic lore, um, there are iterations of the story of the Garden of Eden where
Mhm,
actually it's basically said, and this is just one iteration, there's so many. I mean, Lilith's lore is anything but
mhm.
simple.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
just one of the iterations will say that actually the snake that or the serpent that appeared to Eve in the garden was actually Lilith, and she was just trying to be like, hey girl, like just so you
Mhm,
like giving her the 411 on this fuck boy Adam, and how like she's she's just trying to be a girl's girl basically. And
mhm.
they're very, very, I can't see one without the other. I think both of
Yeah.
them deserve mutual respect and to be recognized and reclaimed.
Mhm. I've always thought that it's fascinating that, like, within Christian tradition, and I always separate out what the scripture says from what the tradition has become, because those are
Hmm.
actually two very different things in most cases.
Yes.
Um, I find it interesting that the female villain within Christianity is a weak, manipulative woman. And
Hmm.
Lilith just doesn't even exist within Christianity. Like, we
Yeah.
have a male devil.
Hmm.
And I'm like, so women can't even be like strong enough to be the villain
Yeah.
within within the Christian tradition, right? Like we just got rid of her because what was a great opportunity for Christianity to be like, see how all that stuff is bad because she's got all kind, like you said, her lore is very complicated. She's got a lot of origin stories. There was a long period of time where she was like just seen as a demon.
Yeah.
I mean, like her just she has like ties to the tree of life and being
Yes.
like a mother goddess before that.
She
um
was also seen as Inanna's darker sister, or like the darker aspect of
yeah,
Inanna. Um,
yeah,
and just her lore actually predates like Christianity, Judaism.
yeah.
And so it is fascinating to me that she didn't make the cut in the Christian Bible, even though she is actually mentioned as Lilithu in
Hmm.
in the Old Testament. but they don't really spend too much time on that, as much
Mhm.
as like at least the Jewish culture does, because in Jewish culture it's like every like it's um I remember my dad, who's Jewish, um telling me the story of Lilith and why it's tradition to sing lullabies to your children before putting them down. And actually, I think it was like part of the word lullaby actually comes from like a derivation of Lilithu, or the,
Hmm.
to kind of ward off the Lilithu spirits and Lilith.
Huh.
Um, so, and she's, a an entity of the night, and so we must, sing to our children so that we ward off her presence and
Huh.
her demonic, yeah. So she's
Interesting. Yeah.
taken more seriously in Judaic lore,
Mhm.
than she is in Christianity, which is definitely interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was raised Catholic. I never
Heard of her,
even
yeah.
heard the name until
Yeah, my
not
mother was raised
even not
Catholic.
even in college, like in
Yeah,
comparative religion courses. I never even heard, like I mean, it was in
yeah,
my adult life that I came across who Lilith was.
yeah. My mother, she was raised Catholic too, and she never heard her name, and she read the
Yeah.
Bible, but
Yeah, and she so easily could have been positioned as a feminine Satan or
yeah, very, very easily.
anyway, but
The
apparently,
patriarchy didn't bother. And I think too, it
yeah.
could have been for a very, you know, the, the agenda of keeping that aspect just hidden in general
Hmm.
of femininity. Because once you go digging, there's just no looking back.
I know,
You're
I
never the
just,
same. You're never the same again. That's yeah, the red pill, blue pill situation.
yeah, that's true. And I know for a lot of us, it starts with Mary Magdalene, right? You learn,
Yes,
you're like, wait, she wasn't a prostitute. Well, what else have I been lied to
exactly.
about?
It's just this
So
domino effect.
I know. I know. And I remember a couple years ago digging into the Garden of Eden story for the first time
Mhm.
and and like learning, I'm like, wait, I'm sorry. You're telling me that the people who wrote this story down and were telling it and hearing it like at that time would have understood all of this symbolism to have been of Asherah or Lilith or a goddess in like they would have understood these to be symbols of sacred feminine energy.
Yeah,
And we're just gonna pretend like none of that's in there. Like,
yeah.
okay, all right.
Yeah. And I think, of course, it's very intentional. I think so. And
Hmm.
also, because if you think about it too, the Septuagint, when it was translated for the first time from Hebrew to Greek, they did not translate it as accurate, and they did that intentionally. So for
Hmm.
example, the passages where demons are mentioned, and they describe demons and basically what qualifies. um I forget it's somewhere in Isaiah, but um basically they substituted, before that, demon was just an intermediary spirit, um
Hmm.
that was like half god, half us, or just like someone who kind of, yeah, was an intermediary between gods and humans, and they had supernatural abilities. They could potentially exist in other realms that are closer to our plane of existence, and so that's kind of the original interpretation of demon. And so that could have been like anything. That could have been fairies, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
um
they used to very specifically have separate words for like evil spirit,
yes,
you know, son of God, which depending on the book you're talking about could either be an
yeah.
angel or it could be another god or it could be
Hmm.
and then yeah, it got translated and they were like these are all demons and demons
Yes,
are all evil.
yeah. and it
We
and
just lost a
even
whole lot of nuance there.
Yeah. And so even gods, one of the very particular demons now is, any gods from like the surrounding religions from,
Hmm.
that area, that region. So yeah, it just, and some demons are, gods
Hmm.
in other religions of that area. And so it's just wild to me how it just escalated. The more and more
Hmm.
we got translations, we have so many translations of the Bible now. And it's like, how do you, at this point, like, how is it possible that you can trust this like one book, and you basically dedicate your entire life to this one book that's been just horribly translated, again and
Yeah.
again and again, and very, very tactically, like, the words have been substituted with a
Hmm.
purpose, to the point
Yeah.
where it's a lot more nuanced, and they just watered it down, and there was an agenda there that wanted to get passed.
Yeah, well, because anytime you translate from one language to another, whoever's doing the
Yeah.
translation at some point has to make a decision
Yes.
about the meaning of words and the meaning of passages, because most languages don't just go like even today, like you don't go French to English. Like
No.
you do, but it's not word for word. Like the person translating has to understand both languages
Yeah.
and what is trying to be conveyed,
Mm-hmm.
and then make a decision about that as they're changing it from language to language. I remember my friend in high school, she I don't remember what movie. She got brought home from China like a bootlegged copy of like some movie that was like still in theaters. Like one of those, yeah,
Yeah.
we were in high school. But when we put it in the DVD player, it had the subtitles were already on and they were English, but they
Mm.
were not the words that were being said by the actors. And so it was
Mm.
very like it was an interesting lesson in like the message mostly was being conveyed.
Yeah.
Um, but that isn't what was being said. These actors weren't saying that. And then every now and then, as a native English speaker,
Yeah.
we'd be like, that subtitle isn't like that doesn't that's not like it's not even correct.
Yeah.
Like it's technically a way that that actor could be saying that thing, but it's not conveying the message that is actually
Yeah.
trying to be conveyed.
Absolutely.
So I think that people forget, it's really easy to forget that
Yeah.
that is, you have to make a decision when you're making translations. And it's impossible for any of us to be completely unbiased.
Mhm.
Anybody, but especially,
Oh,
okay,
you're back.
there, you're back now. We're getting rain today and we have a satellite for internet. So,
Okay. I was like, oh man, my connection. But it's, yeah.
it was probably our satellite.
Well, we got
But
rain on yesterday. So like yeah, and there was floods here and the whole, yeah. So it's been crazy
yeah.
over here.
Um, but yeah, as the patriarchy came through, I think that
Yeah.
the the darker aspects of femininity, which are not again bad, they were very clearly
It's just
destroyed
inconvenient.
because
It's
they were threatening.
inconvenient. Yeah.
Right.
It's highly inconvenient. A woman who values herself and knows what she brings to the table and knows
Hmm.
the power that lies in the shadows, it's very fucking inconvenient.
Yeah, it really is. And so I do a lot of work around the seven deadly sins 'cause and I think they give us good examples of this, right? So if we look at something
Mhm.
like pride, is a really common one. Is being too prideful a problem? Yeah,
Mhm.
it is. If it's coming at the expense of the people around you or you're unable to acknowledge your privilege or where you've had help, yes. But also, like pride is also really important
Yeah.
for your ability to like understand your worth and um all that kind of thing, or anger, right? Being too angry and lashing out at the people around you, bad, right? But
Mhm.
also, like there are a lot of situations in which anger is absolutely the appropriate response.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the patriarchy was like, well, women who are angry are bad.
Mhm.
So these are bad women. All right, so if I'm not allowed to be angry when I'm being mistreated, then how do I move myself to action?
Mhm. You can't. Yeah.
So these are all the aspects of the dark feminine. Um,
Especially because I think anger in general is kind of a symptom of your boundaries being
mhm,
trespassed. And
yeah.
of course, it's just too inconvenient.
Yeah, exactly. It is interesting because like the witch trials as they moved through Europe were so selective, like so intentionally used against women who held property or weren't married or
Mhm.
knew how to use herbs to heal. I mean, it wasn't just like people who were practicing any type of like in quotes witchcraft. It
Right.
was women.
It was women.
It was women who were being killed. I mean, also other people too. Like there were plenty of other people who were killed as well. But like after they got through the men who were leading other religions, then they shifted to women.
Yes.
And our bodies remember that.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. And chances are they're manifesting that trauma if you haven't cleared it
mhm. Yeah, and I
through actual body, like ailments, like physical
mhm.
ailments.
And so that's something else that you do, right? So you're doing like coaching and
Yes.
I can't remember what you're calling it.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I'm doing pleasure coaching. So it is sex coaching, but my focus isn't just general like sex education and telling
Hmm.
you what a vulva is and what's in it. It's mostly my focus is on pleasure, and being able to increase that capacity for pleasure because it is a spectrum. And if you
Hmm.
are someone who has experienced trauma, it has been stored in the body. And if you haven't been able to clear it, your nervous system thinks that pleasure is not safe. And
Hmm.
so you're stuck in this loop of uh, of you're stuck in this loop of repeating. You're not able to close that trauma loop, right?
Hmm.
Because think about it, in the wilderness, when a lion chases a zebra, and you're watching this in National Geographic, what do they do after they get away successfully is that they shake their body off.
Hmm.
They're closing the loop of that stress
Yep.
response. So they're going back, their nervous system is plugging back into the rest and digest,
Hmm.
um, part of that. And so we get back to that, right? But women in particular who have had trauma, affirmations aren't going to work for you.
Hmm.
Uh, it's just not. It's stuck. It's ingrained. It's made its imprint on your shadow, and it's also stuck in the body. And so
Hmm.
that's my goal. Is it's kind of like a shadow integration process. Um, to get women to be back in a state of pleasure and the rest in the digest phase. So it's not entirely just sexual pleasure. It's literally just being more present and being able to hold
Hmm.
space for those have a safe container for those emotions to be processed so you can go back to experiencing life and
Hmm.
experiencing a safe nervous system so that you're open to receiving, because if you've had trauma before, it's high, the chances are high that you are not very open to receiving and you're stuck in this loop. And so that's
Hmm.
what kind of the basis of my pleasure coaching is. And we do a lot of somatic therapy techniques. I basically look at your chart, at your natal chart. It's not a full natal chart analysis where I send you a PDF of everything, even though that's like the more vanilla side of the pleasure coaching. And it's like the more analytical one. But my pleasure coaching is like a combination of astrology. So I look at your chart and kind of see how your energy works and see, we obviously take a look at Black Moon Lilith. We also take a look at Chiron, and just other things in the chart. And so I get to peek at the psyche and we kind of discuss like what's going on, like what are your goals? And most women are just looking to feel safe in their bodies again.
Hmm.
And so, according to the energies that I see in your chart, um, I'm able to customize a tool of or a toolbox of somatic techniques and therapies that will work for you in particular, because
Hmm.
everyone's different. Um, so that's kind of how that works. It's not just like sexual education, and it's a
Hmm.
little bit more than that. It's a little bit more about integrating the shadow and being able to meet it and love
Hmm.
on it and bring it back.
Yeah.
Um, And
Which I
then
think is the
also,
biggest thing that's missing in the shadow work, like in spirituality, is I see so many people that are like, do, if they're even doing shadow work in the first place,
yeah,
because journaling and pulling cards is not going to get you there.
no, it's not.
If they're even doing shadow work in the first place, they like excavate the trauma and
Yes.
then that's it. And it's like, no, 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 that's not it.
No, you
That
need
was
to move
step
it.
one.
You need to
Then
move
we
it
need
through.
to like
It's that
continue.
that's the thing.
Integration is a thing.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the take, right? That's like the more you can't think your way through the trauma. You can't talk
Right,
your way
because
through
if
the
we
trauma.
could, then it would be gone.
We wouldn't be walking around the way that we are on a daily basis, and then having to spend decades, speaking to a therapist, which goes hand in hand. I think you require both.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but if you have serious trauma, chances are talking about it isn't going to work for you. You need to get into your
Mhm.
shadow. You need to move it through the body, and you need to heal your nervous system from that,
Mhm.
because the shadow and the nervous system are
Yeah.
so intertwined,
Right. And
and you
that's what I'm
can't.
always saying is your nervous system can be activated, depending on where your belief system is, but can be activated by, triggers surrounding trauma that
Yes.
happened to you in this life, which you may not even be aware of what that trigger is or why it's triggering your nervous
Yeah.
system. It can be epigenetically triggered because
Yeah.
a woman in the last 7 generations is what science is telling us, at least at
Yes.
minimum 7 generations,
Minimum.
which is 150 people.
Mhm.
Um, our nervous system can be kind of triggered based on those experiences
Yep.
because trauma is passed down. And it can be triggered based on your past life experience. Anything sitting in your shadow can trigger your nervous system. And so
Mhm.
if we don't know what's being triggered, it's hard to heal it. And if we don't then prove to our nervous system that it's actually safe to heal and to
Yes.
let go of those beliefs, these are separate pieces. And
Absolutely.
so I see a lot of people skipping that
Yeah. No,
integration. Like, don't just dredge up the trauma to like, we don't, the point is not to make yourself feel worse.
yeah, and that's kind of what happens is that's one of the risks of approaching shadow work without someone who's more experienced, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because especially on, like, I see TikTok and Instagram, they make it seem like shadow work is about journaling, and it's really not. It can be
Mm-hmm.
good to journal. Absolutely, I recommend it for
Yeah.
some people, but that's not shadow work at all. That's like, you're not even scratching the surface of it.
Mm-hmm.
Shadow work is
No,
dirty. You need to go down there. You're gonna get your
I
hands
know.
dirty, and you're gonna meet your trauma, and you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
thank it, but you're also gonna be like, hey, like, this is a safer lifetime. This
Mm-hmm.
is a safer, chapter in my life. Like, it's okay, and you're gonna thank it, and you're gonna bid it goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
um it's hard, and yeah, the waters are murky, but the more love that you pour into it, and the more you're willing to, look at it,
Mm-hmm.
the better it's going to go. And
Yeah.
so, and that's the thing, it's like, manifestation work, kind of, I've seen the same situation where, it's just like speaking affirmations, like, you have to do it. It's not, though. You want to receive more pleasure in your life, you want to receive more money, you want to
Mm-hmm.
receive abundance, you want a partner who is absolutely head over heels for you. How are you going to achieve that when your nervous system doesn't think
Mm-hmm.
it's safe to have any of those things,
Exactly.
right? So that's the pleasure that I specifically work with. It's the
Mm-hmm.
pleasure in all aspects. And of course, like, yeah, we want, because it is also, the coaching is also um kink positive and BDSM,
Mm-hmm.
informed. And so there are exclusively, at least in my clients and my personal experience, where BDSM and kink positive practices have actually, it's a shadow integration process as well. It
Mm-hmm.
requires a lot, and it requires accountability and responsibility and respect, not just
Yeah.
for yourself, but for the other person, and then boundaries. So it really is like adding all those elements of shadow integration. But because it's in a setting where you're releasing all these the oxytocin and
Mm-hmm.
all the feel good chemicals, right? Because it's a pleasurable experience. Often it's less daunting of a shadow work process. And
Mm-hmm.
so I recommend that as well. And obviously that depends on the individual, but I do like that's also part of, and so like in the Black, this is all this to say that in the Black Moon Lilith ebook, I do have BDSM and kink positive practices that
Mm-hmm.
kind of go hand in hand with whatever wherever Black Moon Lilith is being expressed on the chart. Because those there's a lot of neurology as well that goes behind it, and it's proven that when you're in that state of like just either having sex or just foreplay, whatever, um, you're kind of in a trance state. Your brain
Mm-hmm.
waves are in a trance state, and so you're still in that frequency, that like theta frequency that you need to be in order for you to just do shadow work in general,
Right.
and you enter that like meditative state. um but it's just it seems less daunting to trauma victims, only because there's that pleasure, that element of pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another reason why I kind of just combined all of it together. And it's a weird job, but someone's got to do it, right? So yeah, that's kind of how the coaching situation works. But yes, it is, it's so much more, it's so nuanced. Just like your chart is
Mm-hmm.
probably very nuanced. No one else in your chart, or no one else in the world has your chart. I've read for twins as well, and just minutes apart, like
Hmm.
the fast moving angles will switch, they'll change a few degrees, and then that's going to start aspecting other things on the chart. So truly, no one in this world has your same exact chart. You are just an amalgamation of like all these unique elements. And so I couldn't cast aside the astrology from the actual trauma
Mm-hmm.
informed like somatic work that we do. Uh yeah, it's just it's an extra tool that helps me understand how your energy works, and just more effective, and kind of see like where you're at too, because sometimes I'll also look at the transits and see kind of what's coming up for you naturally, um, what's being activated on the chart and what's coming up for you, and then according to that I'll be like, okay, well this person will probably benefit from, boundary setting. And so I'll look into, is that person open to trying a little shibari
Mm-hmm.
practice? And that is also a somatic experiencing. You wouldn't believe it, but there are so many people who just have this release during, if you're being rigged, meaning that you're the one who's getting tied. Um, they just release, it's an emotional release. It's very cathartic. And so they just release all these pent up emotions that you have, and they just feel good after.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the shadow work, it takes the edge off of shadow work, because some things are very deep,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and they're very much ingrained. And so you kind of have to trick the shadow to be like, well, it's kind of pleasurable. It's okay.
See, but like, well,
We're
this
having
is
fun.
probably because of where my Black Moon Lilith is. I'm like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
To me, sex, anything sexual is like the hardest part of my shadow to
Yes,
address,
but
whether it is in
that's,
meditation or actually in the
yeah.
bedroom. For me, like that
Mhm.
was the last place that I was ready to go. It has been the hardest, but
Yeah.
it's also the um I'm trying to figure out how I want to say this. It's later than I normally do these videos
I know, same. Like
today.
my brain has.
Um, if you want to go after women's power, what better way to do it than to take
Exactly.
away their sexuality, which used to be considered a direct line to God and to the
To the divine.
divine.
Mhm.
And that I'm not recommending we go back to this, or I'm not saying that this is true, but it used to be believed in some cultures that the only way for men to experience the divine was through sex with a woman, because
Yeah.
she was the one that had the tie to
Hmm.
God. So again, like I'm not saying like that's what I believe. I'm just saying it's an interesting
No,
cultural shift to go
absolutely.
the opposite way with it.
And there is evidence of temples that were
Hmm.
erected for the goddess or the goddess archetype across different cultures. And what these men would do essentially, and this is kind of like where the archetype of the sacred prostitute comes in, right?
Hmm.
Because these men, in order to worship the goddess, they would come to these temples and they would have sex with, or sex rituals with, a sex priestess
Hmm.
from, that goddess, and that's how they would worship the goddess. And it, it's just, all of that has been completely
Hmm.
um demonized now. And
Yep.
I think that's, it's for very good reason, because women, we get our life force energy from our pleasure.
Hmm.
And so what better way, like you said, than to target that
Hmm.
and
And it's
make that.
arguably the most powerful alchemical tool we have for changing one emotion
Yes.
into another, or trauma, letting
Or
go of
trauma.
trauma,
Yes.
or any of that stuff. It's super powerful alchemically and this is what the female body, regardless of how you identify gender wise, is very powerful at alchemizing energy through
Hmm.
through a creative process, whether that be sex
Yes.
or you're writing or painting or whatever it is.
Mm.
um but it's
Yeah.
really
Your sexual energy is your
it's
creative energy.
powerful. Hmm.
And yeah, it's so wild to me. But here we are. And that's my mission.
Yeah.
That is my mission, is for women, after all these years of being, you know, ostracized by society because, oh, you're too slutty, like
Hmm.
you have too many partners, you da, da, da. No. um and of course there's healthy expressions of sexuality, and then there
Right.
isn't, and that we have to look at that as well.
But we can say
What's
that
your
with
relationship with
literally
it?
anything. There are healthy
Yes,
ways to engage
absolutely.
with almost anything, and unhealthy ways to engage with
Yeah.
almost anything. Um, how many people do it? Like I know people who are so obsessive about their fitness and their health that it has become unhealthy.
Yes. Right.
Like it's almost always about balance, in my
Hmm.
opinion.
And I think just the intention in general, because if you love yourself and you're very
Hmm.
in tune with yourself, it's going to be hard for you to pick a partner that
Hmm.
isn't going to value you the way that you want to be valued, right? And so that kind of goes the same for sexuality. It's like, well, where is it coming from? Is it coming from a place of disassociation
Hmm.
from certain things that are
Right. Are you
triggering?
using it as escapism?
Exactly. Or
Exa-
is it just a connection to your body and you feeling good?
Mhm.
And so, like, it's all about the intention and kind of where this is coming from
Mhm.
and how it's being expressed. Like, are people around you being hurt, or are you okay? Like, how are your relationships? How are your
Right.
connections? Um, yeah, there's a lot to look at. But I think just in general, men are praised for having, all these women, and like a
Mhm.
womanizer, like, wow, good for you. Uh, and then women, complete opposite dynamic, right? Uh, so, and just like I mean, growing up with a conservative father, right? Who's Jewish, and like I couldn't even wear shorts. Because he was like, it's like you're asking for it. He was one of those. And to me it was ironic because he never knew, but I had already been sexually assaulted multiple times, and some of them being by some of his friends. um
Yeah.
yeah. And so that was the irony of it all. It's like, well,
Mhm.
and I think too, if I would have had a healthier relationship, or just like a healthier outlook, more holistic outlook on bodily autonomy, and
Mhm.
how the way that I dress actually um
Yep.
doesn't get to, provoke men or whatever. It it actually I would have felt more empowered, and I would have been
Mm-hmm.
smarter about speaking up, right? And I don't think I would have been as terrified of speaking up either.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of that. I think purity and culture in general is kind of a
Mm-hmm.
breeding ground for victims to
Yes.
flourish,
Mm-hmm.
because you alienate them from their bodily autonomy, and you alienate them from establish their own self-esteem, and being able to establish healthy boundaries. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I have three daughters, and so even today, like I will not be like, oh, go kiss your grandpa, or like go hug him, like
Yeah.
go, no, like your body is yours and you get to do whatever
Mm-hmm.
you want with it. I don't care to hurt anyone else's feelings. Make sure that it's something that you want to do, and if you don't, then don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was raised up with, you got to kiss your grandpa, you got to it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, okay, I
Your
could
body's
see.
not here to keep other people comfortable.
Exactly. I'm not gonna set my children on fire to keep you warm. Um,
Right.
so
Yeah.
it was definitely, I now being a mom of girls, uh,
Mm-hmm.
which I love it, have that experience. And so I think that's been very helpful in that. Um, and all this to say too, the practices that I integrate, the somatic techniques, the somatic exercises, um, kink and BDSM have been instrumental in my own healing journey, along with astrology. And so I kind of just, it's like kind of like a modge podge of all the things that have worked for me,
Mm-hmm.
where I get to tailor it for somebody else and be like, here's your toolbox, like let's work together. And so sometimes it gets really heavy, but it's so fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
The healing that hasn't taken place after decades of, just talk therapy has been done
Mm-hmm.
in like a few months. And this is not to say that healing is linear and that healing, should take a short amount of time. I think you're going about the wrong way if that's kind of your mentality behind it. But it's been effective.
Mm-hmm.
It's been effective, and I think it's worth discussing, and I think it's worth bringing it to the attention of other women who are looking for solutions for a really long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's so powerful. Um, I have a 3-year-old, almost 3-year-old son, and we're already working. Same thing, right? He never is forced to hug other people or
Right.
whatever. But I'm raising a white male.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm also looking at it from that perspective. So we're already
Yeah.
with the cat and with the dogs. Does Tiger look like he's enjoying that?
Mm-hmm.
No. Okay, well then you have to stop.
Yeah.
Like we're already working on all of that stuff with because I will be raising a child who is, your daughters are safe around, for example.
Yes.
Uh,
And that's the thing,
but
is we need more women to come to that,
mhm,
and
yeah.
I think too, there's
But
a massive collective shift within the feminine.
mhm,
And so I think more and more women are having feminine awakenings, and they're, being reconnected to their intuition and their bodies.
mhm.
And so it
Because
now
you can't actually separate those things.
you really can't.
And trust me, I would love to. I would love to separate those things,
Yes.
but it is not how it works. It is not how it works.
Yeah, they're not independent of each other by
Right.
any
You
means.
experience your intuition, you experience your spirituality, you experience all of that through
Through
this
the
body.
body. That's what
And
it's
so if
here
your
for.
nervous system is all screwed up, you're not experiencing any of that.
Mhm.
Not well, and not in a way that actually shifts your life the way you want it to.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Many times the life that we think we want, we're actually terrified of. That's the tricky part of being in a
yes.
meat suit, is that we're fucking
Hmm.
afraid of it.
Well, and a lot of times, so a lot of the women I work with, and you've probably seen this, I've lived it. We can't even identify the life we want because we're
Right.
so afraid to want it or to feel envy or to like nothing feels safe. And so we just go down the path that you're supposed to go down.
Right.
And then you go, wait, am I living my life or am I living somebody else's life?
Yes.
And so a lot of women have to
Take a step
come to
back.
terms with that in
Yes.
some way.
Yeah. And that's the part of individuation. And
Hmm.
it's like peeling back all the layers and all the identities that people just threw at
Hmm.
you and you picked up for the sake of not
Right.
severing that connection.
Yeah.
It was always for the sake of, or the purpose of maintaining that connection, that
Hmm.
attachment.
Yep.
Uh,
Keeping yourself safe.
yes,
And as women, keeping yourself
yes,
safe is pretty much the same as keeping the people around you happy.
yes,
Those things are pretty much
yes.
synonymous.
Hmm.
So that can be a hard one to unravel. I know I feel,
It
for
is
example, I have
very,
like the
yes,
safest husband in the world in every way.
yeah,
And he can have a bad day at work and he comes home and I feel unsafe because he's unhappy. And I have to fix it because my body feels
hmm
unsafe. And
hmm
I've had to spend so much time being like, okay, he is not, you are not unsafe. You are perfect. He can be angry and I am safe.
yes,
But my body has a really hard time with that because for thousands of years, an angry man
yes,
is an unsafe man. And
yes,
every fiber of my being remembers that.
hmm
Being married to a man who's literally never lashed out at me in any way, shape, or form, even when I
right.
quite possibly deserved it, to be
I
totally
have,
honest.
I have the same situation come up for me. Uh, Safest man ever. I'm married to the safest man ever. I mean, he's a little literal earth angel. And my body is still, it's the other thing too, is I think trauma goes down generations
Mm-hmm.
and then it hits someone that's meant to process it. And then you come up with these kinds of things.
Yeah.
You're fortunate. And obviously you're in a
Mm-hmm.
safe relationship, but
Right.
epigenetically that has changed, right? Because all the
Mm-hmm.
women before you have felt that and it's in your
It was
DNA.
only like 1974 or something that women could have their own credit cards.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was yesterday.
And I don't think they actually didn't even include women in scientific studies till 1993.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's
It's
absolutely wild when you
We're
start
still
looking
very
into it.
behind. We're
Yeah.
very behind.
In a very benign way, I explained it to my husband. I said, best case scenario, it's like this. My husband and I are both lefties. And the world is created for right-handed people. Everything in
Yes.
the world is created for right-handed people.
Yeah.
And I said, you know how multiple times a day you realize you're living in a world made for people who use their right hand?
Hmm.
It's like that being a woman.
Yeah.
At minimum, best case scenario,
Best
it's like
case.
that.
Yes.
Worst case scenario, it actually is unsafe. But
Mhm.
and he
Yeah,
was like, okay, well,
it's
that actually makes
navigating
a lot
that.
of sense.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. Actually, I'm going to use that from now on because that is very accurate.
Yeah, because it's just the world, when you are left-handed dominant, the
Yes.
world is just simply not set up for you. Scissors aren't
Mhm.
made for that. Like
No.
this journal isn't made
Hmm.
for people who write with their left hand. Um, my
Yeah.
mouse is supposed to be on the right side of my computer. Have you ever used like
Like
one
this.
of those pencil sharpeners
Yeah.
on the wall? Like you can't do that with your left hand. This is why
Yeah.
statistically left-handed people tend to be like better problem solvers and stuff because
Because you're
you
forced to.
had to be.
Yes.
Um, so anyway,
Very,
that
yeah.
was the one that helped him start to understand why the
Understand.
patriarchy was hard for women
Hmm.
because he's just a man who just lives his man life.
Yeah.
But
And the thing is, yeah, for thousands of years, it was actually very unsafe. Like you could
mhm,
get mutilated,
right,
like very severe consequences.
if your husband got angry and kicked you out of the house, you couldn't have money, you
Hmm.
couldn't own property.
Yeah.
You just literally had nothing. Your safety and the safety and well-being of you and your children relied on this man
Yes.
like allowing it.
Hmm.
And that's something that women's bodies remember. And I think that we need to both acknowledge that and then cut ourselves some slack. And then
Yeah.
also do the work to be like, it's not going to happen now. Where
Mhm.
we live, there are areas of the world where it still does, but where I
Right.
live, that
It
isn't
is
going to
safe.
happen. So while
Mhm.
it feels like I'm going to die, I'm actually just uncomfortable. And those are different. But it can take a lot of work to get there, to feel safe enough in your body to be like to believe that that's true.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
agree.
Anyway, I don't remember what time I pushed record, so I'm pretty sure it's been a while now.
I didn't even check.
Anything else that you wanted to say? I'll make sure all your information is in the description box below so that people can like look you up and find all the things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
The ebook is worth it. Your email list is one of the
And
few
the
emails
ebook
I
is
actually
free.
open. So yes, the ebook is free.
Yeah.
Um,
It's just a freebie. You enter your email, and it gets sent automatically to you. And then in the ebook, I don't just talk about Black Moon Lilith through the zodiacal signs, but I do have, like I said, practices that will help with that, and
mhm,
more general, and then kink positive or BDSM. So it's like both of that. Um, and then I also, I think it's the first chapter, I actually go into Lilith's lore and how that
mhm,
actually ties into Black Moon Lilith. And we go back to like ancient Babylon,
mhm,
ancient Mesopotamia. So I also, if it's you're someone who wants to learn about Lilith and
mhm.
you're curious, it's still a good, chapter
Yes.
to kind of dive
This is
into.
not so like I know we all have experiences, right, where you like download the freebie and it's like really vague and not
Yeah,
that
and
great.
yeah,
And
no.
you're like, okay, like it's fine. This is not like that. This is like
Yeah,
a real thing.
it's
So,
44 pages long.
yeah,
So I try to, make it as concise and brief as possible,
right.
but I still had to go into Lilith's lore.
Hmm.
And that, like we mentioned, it's anything but simple. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, maybe we'll
well,
have to have you back on the channel just so we can talk about working with Lilith because
yeah,
I know
just
we both
working.
work with her very
Yeah,
closely. Um,
yeah.
Personally, with my clients, she comes up a lot.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Well,
that's that for the ebook, and yeah, it's for free. So um I think that's it about the ebook, right?
yeah, I will make sure all of that information is below, guys. So all of Alexandra's information is below in the box. You can book a reading with her. You can purchase witchy goods from her. You can get that free Black Moon Lilith ebook, which I highly recommend. And then, of course, if you want more information on my programs and ways you can work with me, then that information is in the box below as well. I will see you in the next video. Bye.